Again, those that are just joining us right now, you're welcome to the African City Research Consortium webinar, the governance of Kampala City, reform coalitions and city and civil society doing their fair share. So you're welcome to the webinar. We'll be beginning shortly. Again, a reminder to those that have joined us that this session is being recorded, and the video will be available after the session. And to use the chat to introduce yourself, where you're working from and where you're joining us the webinar from. Thank you very much. And Hannah, please signal me if we have the right quorum to start. Thank you.
I think we can go ahead, Teddy, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Again, my name is Teddy Sembo. I work with the UAL, the Urban Action Lab at Makerere University in the Department of Geography, Geoinformatics, and Climate Sciences. Again, welcome everyone to the webinar, to the African City Research Consortium webinar. The theme for the webinar is the governance of Kampala City, our reform coalitions and civil society doing their fair share. So just to give us how the webinar will run, we'll have a presentation from the Urban Action Lab. And then that will be a 10-minute presentation. And from there, we'll have a panel discussion for about 20 minutes. And then we will head in the Q&A. And just for the audience, as throughout the webinar, as it runs from the presentation, please use the question and answer session to put your questions so that we'll be able to have them, and then we will give them. And if you're addressing it to a particular individual, also put it in the question so that we know whom to address it to. Okay, without any further ado, I would like to invite from the Urban Action Lab a presentation, and that will be given to Dr. Paul and Peter Kasaija to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teddy, for that opening brief to our webinar this morning. Once again, my name is Kasaija Peter, a researcher, also a PhD scholar with the Urban Action Lab based at Geography Department, Makerere University. And glad to be here. Looking forward to sharing some of our insights from the research that we've done under this work, the ACRC project. And I'll run through a very quick presentation on behalf of the Urban Action Lab. If you can run through to the second slide, I'll just give a very brief overview of the primary motivation behind the research that we've been doing under this particular research, so that it kind of like sets the foundation or sets the basis for our discussion in this webinar this morning. What exactly was were the intended outcomes of this particular project? If we could ask ourselves that question. Essentially, under ACRC, what we have been trying to achieve or trying to actualize in this particular initiative is to generate a robust set of knowledge and evidence, which we think is very important towards contributing to transformative change. And we're looking at knowledge and evidence specifically on the political and systemic configurations of cities in Africa. In our case, we are looking at Kampala. And this particular project, of course, as you are all aware, has been supported by FCDO, along with other partners, development agencies, including national and local governments, as well as civil society. Next slide, please. As highlighted in the previous slide, the essence of our research, our work, our engagement under this project has been to generate new knowledge, evidence that tries to speak to the complexities of the politics that underlies the systems in many of Africa's African cities. We acknowledge that African cities are very complex, they're very dynamic, very fluid, and there's a lot of political contestation going on in these cities, in addition to rapid demographic growth, physical growth, in all other forms of dimensions. So under this particular project, we have essentially been able to mobilize different actors, for example, in the domains of research, policy think tanks, civil society organizations, who have significant history and experience when it comes to dealing with the challenges that urban residents face in African cities, especially those who are considered to be marginalized, on the fringes, or disadvantaged in these cities. Next slide, please. While for our case, we are dealing with the Kampala, the research has also brought together extensive networks, experiences, actors from other cities across Africa. As you can see there, we have Accra, we've had Freetown, Harare, Zimbabwe, Lilongwe, Maiduguri, Mogadishu, Nairobi, in addition to Dar es Salaam, Lagos, Addis Ababa, and Bukavu. So we've had that very extensive network of stakeholders that are engaged in generating this knowledge and this evidence on all these cities across Africa towards achieving the outcome that we are looking at. Next slide, please. And essentially, under this ACRC research approach, the focus has been placed on 4 preconditions that we think are very important when we are talking about transformative urban change. What are these 4 preconditions or 4 important elements? We are looking at political commitment, especially from elites, as being very important as a cornerstone of this particular initiative or this research's approach. Coalitions, especially amongst formal and informal actors. Citizens who have been mobilized, and therefore through this mobilization they are enabled or they are capacitated to push for this transformative change that we are advocating or we are trying to promote. And of course, agencies to build short-term and long-term state capacity, because the state is at the center. We realize that the state is very important, but the issue of capacity is also critical when it comes to the state. How do we reinforce? How do we build? How do we ensure that the state has that capacity to drive the long and short-term change that we are looking for? Next slide, please. And under this work that we've been doing, we've been able to generate evidence that is meant to create, accelerate, as well as sustain urban reform that we are looking for through 3 interconnected approaches, as you can see there. Politically informed systems analysis, domain analysis of city policy and programming, as well as action research. And of course, these are interlinked elements, as you can see there. Next slide, please. Under this approach, we've undertaken an analysis of the city domains in the different cities in terms of policy and programming, which look at the built environment, the economic aspects, the social aspects. And of course, as you can see there, these are some of the critical domains that we think require more attention and focus as we have seen under the ACRC research project. We are talking about, for example, housing, informal settlements, land and connectivity, structural transformation, all the way down to safety and security. So in each one of these cities, different research teams have been engaging with these different domains to generate this new knowledge and evidence towards transformative urban change. And of course, it is through this engagement with these different domains that we've been able to generate a deep understanding of some of the major challenges, problems facing the different cities individually and collectively, because we know that there are challenges that cut across, but there are also challenges that are very unique and very specific to the cities that we are or that we've been working in across Africa. Next slide, please. So we hope that the insights, evidence that we have generated will improve conditions, services, chances, opportunities of residents in these cities, especially the disadvantaged communities or the marginalized communities. Just to emphasize that these are very important elements. Having that scenario where you are well informed of the political systems, the domains when it comes to city policy and programming, and then of course, the element of action research. The next slide is just meant to give you an insight into the inequalities that we will see in many of the cities that this project has been anchored. This one is taken from a well-known residential neighborhood in Kampala. This is Naguru. As you can see, inequality visualized. It's very visible. And these are some of the issues that we think we need to engage with, better understand with information, with knowledge, with evidence, to try and address these challenges as experienced by cities in Africa. Next slide. The next slide shows something similar. It's not so different from the previous slide. Again, it just gives you an idea of these deep-seated inequalities, a challenge that we need to address when it comes to cities in Africa. How do we reduce these inequalities? Inequalities that are impacting on the lives, everyday lives of residents, of neighborhoods, of communities. How do these inequalities affect productivity? How do they affect access to opportunities? How do they affect possibilities? Next slide also depicts more or less something similar in another neighborhood in Kampala. So this is a very common characteristic that you'll find not only in Kampala, but elsewhere in other cities across Africa. Inequality. How do we deal with inequality, the way it manifests, for example, through this evidence that we've generated? Next slide, please. Here, I will just walk through a few brief highlights that have emerged from the work that we've been doing in Kampala. Kampala has essentially had 4 domains: informal settlements, health, well-being and nutrition, land and connectivity, youth and capability development. But bringing together the evidence that we've generated across these different domains. The highlights speak to, for example, the fact that when you look at the political systems across the city or in Kampala, they are very highly fragmented, they are very personalized, and these are, when you look at this character of political authority or the political configuration, it is undermining prospects for reform. There is very little coordinated action, especially by political and bureaucratic actors. There is no incentive, especially by the central government, to invest in sustained transformative interventions in response to Kampala's multiple challenges. Another important and critical highlight that has emerged from our research across the 4 domains in Kampala is that Kampala still is important to the ruling elites, especially from the economic perspective. As a tax base, it's a major source of economic rents, especially from the perspective of real estate and land. Next slide. Commitment to privatization, market-driven responses has weakened the capacity of the government, especially when it comes to superintending over critical systems, effective services, more coordinated services. In addition, what we are seeing unfolding from our research in Kampala is that there have been significant impacts on service delivery as a result of these trends in terms of the political settlement, the personalized, informalized nature of politics, the economic rents. All these have culminated in major impacts on service delivery, and these have created deficiencies or gaps that are largely being filled by private, formal and informal actors. And of course, as a city, we know that it is a combination of several systems. We are looking at systems such as essential social services, water supply, sanitation, solid waste management, education, healthcare, safety and security, transportation, justice, all these things. When you look at them, they are very critical sites of contestation. There's a lot of contestation amongst the actors that are engaged or that have interests across all these different systems. And of course, as a result of these contestations within the different systems of the city, we are seeing very specific outcomes. Outcomes that affect, for example, the transport systems, outcomes that affect access to energy, electricity, outcomes that affect safety, security, justice, and all these other critical elements. Next slide, please.
Peter, you only have 2 minutes. I hate to tell you this, but
Yes, thank you very much. I'm about to conclude. So the next slides are essentially just captions, snippets, or snapshots of the scenery or the political setting that we have in Kampala. I mean, in this particular slide, we are talking about the borders, the potholes as tourist attractions. All these things are the realities that we are seeing in the case of Kampala. How do we deal with these particular challenges that we see emerging? Please continue, go on, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, next slide. A lot of contestation. We're talking about personalization. All these images are meant to give you just an understanding of the way the politics have emerged or have been structured in Kampala. For example, you can see the pictures here of the first son or the president's son making a tour of the city. Questions arise here around the legitimacy of the city authority vis-a-vis, for example, such officers. What are their roles? What are their responsibilities when it comes to this? It creates so many questions when you see these elites coming in and engaging with some of these particular issues. Yeah, please move on. Next slide. Next slide, Teddy. Yeah, so most of these are just different dimensions that are meant to give you a perspective into the complexities, the challenges facing Kampala. It's not just the roads and the potholes, the borders, but we also have so many other issues that we are dealing with. We are talking about, for example, partnerships between the private sector, cultural institutions, religious institutions, philanthropic organizations. All these are also important actors that are very much invested in the city's development, especially when you look at the important sectors regarding services. Please move on, next slide. Yeah, so again, from our research, as you can see, life in Kampala is about survival. It endures in alternatives. All centralized institutional models are not systematically functioning well, and these are very evident in all these different elements that we've seen emerging in our research. We talk about CAMUFUs when it comes to energy, VHTs, GALPA technologies, sanitation, waste pickers, alternative water systems, renewables. All these are emblematic of the situation that we have in Kampala when you look at the structure of its politics. Yeah, please go ahead, move on. Next slide. Yeah, I think these are slides we can simply move over. They're just, again, other different elements that give us an idea of some of the emerging issues regarding who are the key actors, what are their roles, what are their interests, what kind of power do these different actors have, the networks, how do these networks operate? All these are present a very complex picture when it comes to service delivery and ultimately the character of life as it is experienced by residents, especially those who live on the margins in Kampala. I think given the time constraints, I will want to close my presentation with a thank you from the audience here. Yes, Teddy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter and Dr. Mkwaya and the entire team from the Urban Action Lab for the presentation. And some of the emerging issues that are coming out of the research. We see issues of how the informal or private sector are coming in to fill in the gaps as gap fillers due to the issues that the existing infrastructure aren't able to deliver services. And we also see the power struggles and influence within. But we also see how the youth feel neglected and don't have access to information. Some of the key issues that are coming out from the research, and how the lack of information, how different actors can use it to their own benefits, from brokers on land markets, and also other people that are next to power that can easily influence how people experience their lives in the cities. Thank you so much. And now I think we'll go into our next session, which we're having a panel discussion. And I am pleased to inform you that we do have a very gender-sensitive panel this morning. And I'm going to introduce them. It's a panel of 4 people, 3 ladies and 1 gentleman. And then we'll head into it. So please, the audience, again, I would love to remind you that you can use the Q&A function to put in any comments that or any questions that you might have. And if you're addressing a particular question to an individual, to Peter, or any of the panelists as they come to give their remarks, please note it. Also include the person that you want to add your question to go to. Okay, so right away, I would love to introduce, we do have Mr. Paddy Joseph Walter. He is a Commissioner of Urban Development in the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development here in Uganda. He is responsible for urban development sector in the country, including the national urban policy. He has experience of 15 years in urban planning and development, urban governance, and urban land management. He has been involved in establishing and promotion of concepts of urban development forums as a platform for enhancement of good governance, transparency, accountability, and stakeholder empowerment. And the next person, or next panelist we do have is Honorable Namazi Olive, who is the LC5 Woman Councillor for Kampala. And she is not only a politician, but she is an environmentalist, but she is also pursuing her PhD in public policy and governance. You're welcome, Honorable. And then our next panelist is Miss Fiona Nshemerere. She's an urban development expert with UN Habitat or United Nations Human Settlement Program here based in Kampala. She has over 13 years experience working with communities, cities, in exploring innovations and effective spatial planning and management practices to address complex urban development issues in Uganda. And then lastly, we do have Sarah Nandutu, who is the chairperson for the National Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda. So you're welcome, panelists, to this webinar. Sorry. And I'm going to go right away into the questions that we will have for your discussion and reflection. I will start with Commissioner Paddy. Commissioner Paddy, one of the key issues that have come from the research is how the private formal and informal actors are filling in the gaps for in service delivery. As the Ministry of Land, what approaches are available to engage both the private informal and the informal sector and the private formal sector in issues of service delivery? That is for you, Commissioner Paddy. I don't know if you are able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'm sorry I joined in a bit late, but the question that you asked, what approaches we mainly place to involve both the formal and informal actors, especially as far as urban development is concerned. I agree with you, of course there are gaps, but as a government, it is in our principle and policy that we involve everyone, whether you are in the formal sector or you are in informal. That's why we deliberately established the concept of development forums, like indicated in my short biography. These forums create a platform for all actors to participate in the development process. We are looking at slum dwellers, part of these forums. We have the private sector, big enterprises, small ones. We have the academia in those forums. So they really create an environment and a platform for all to participate in the development process of these cities. Now, most important of all, you know, when you are talking of development is universal. Of course, we have to ensure that we have adequate involvement of all, like I said, and then the policy framework should be quite conducive for participation of all. We have the National Urban Policy, which is quite detailed in as far as engagement of all, all stakeholders in the informal and the formal sector of the economy. Of course, you are aware that the informal sector plays a very big role, and in the process, they cannot be ignored in the development process. Very critical, and as a government, as a ministry, those are some of the things we are trying to do. Create an environment for participation of all, involve everyone, put in place a clear policy framework. We are also moving to the next level of having a clear legal framework for the urban sector. And I'm sure in our legal framework, we should be able to enhance that aspect of good governance and the stakeholder engagement in the development process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Paddy, for elaborating on how some of the platforms that the government has created, like the National Urban Forum for engagement, but also creating my question, it's a follow-up, you may not have to answer it right now, is how do we measure the effectiveness of the participations of the different informal actors and the actors that you try to bring on board, but that is for later. I'll move on to Fiona. Fiona, as a development partner, how can collaborative strategies between the government, its agencies, and all the multiplicities that Peter has aligned with the stakeholders that are really trying to engage in urban development, how can collaborative strategies be implemented effectively to ensure sustainable urban development or even enhance decision making in Kampala?
Thank you, Teddy. Also, thank you for having me today in this very important webinar. First and foremost, I think for us, it's the shared responsibility and collective action that is really important and needs to be appreciated by all the stakeholders. We know that the challenges that were highlighted in the presentation Peter gave are at different levels, and the challenge is quite enormous. And it would be very difficult to have or to hold maybe only government accountable to addressing this challenge, given the resources we have and the realities of Uganda as a country. So I think from where I stand, so I was saying that I think this is a shared responsibility between government, non-government actors, and the people. The people that are affected by these policies, to come together to ensure that we all realize the potential or whatever we want, the development that we need to achieve in this country in terms of urban development. And then also, one of the challenges that was not identified is the youth and the abilities that they have, and how they can be harnessed in promoting urban development of this nation. So I just think that probably creating collaborative efforts in every area, for instance, what Commissioner Pade mentioned, the municipal development platforms are very key to ensuring that these efforts are actually realized in the cities.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's key that we all live in the city and every joint must supply at every level, and we need to work collaboratively and not just point fingers. At times, pointing fingers does work, but to a lesser extent. And I'll move on to our next panelist, that is Honorable Olive. I hope you're still here with us. One of the key issues that came up was that the youth are not, they feel like they lack inadequate and weak collaborations with the government or any other sector. They're not heard, they're not, they lack information on how to engage in urban-related issue or in governance in itself. So I wanted to highlight one of the key issues that you are addressing to ensure that the youth are being heard in Kampala.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody, and to everybody in your time zone. I greet all of you. For starters, since I think we are talking about governance in Kampala, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Urban Action Lab for coming up with this research. I think it's a great opportunity for us, especially as the city, to use this occasion to brainstorm on some of the challenges and also coming up with a shared view on how to surmount these challenges. Because for me, I know that information is power, and also you as the Urban Action Lab, as outsiders, it is important for us to get your perspective, to get an outsider's perspective, because it helps us as policymakers and implementers also to get feedback on our efficacy, the efficacy of our policies. I look at this webinar as a kind of a mirror that is giving us that true image of ourselves as a city, because when I look at this research, it is really spot on. When I look at the summary of the findings, the challenges, they are really spot on. And I think that is what we are really facing as those are the biggest challenges that we are facing as a city. So I really take this opportunity to thank you. The youth, yes, I think for a city like Kampala, which has about 4.5 million people during the day and then about 2 million people during the night, with a growth rate of about 5.6%, and the biggest percentage of the people in the city are youths, there's a very big challenge. There's research which shows that it is research, I think, of 2016-17. It was a national household survey, which indicated that 20% of the labor force was recorded as unemployed, and then 23% of the youth labor force was underemployed, either in working hours, also in the wages that are earned. So when you look at Kampala as a city, we have very many youths, and most of our youths, for me, the areas I represent areas that I'm happy that there's somebody from the Slum Dwellers Association. These areas are majorly slums. Kampala has about 60 slums. There are so many, and most of these youths stay here. So we have
one that you want.
Peter,
So
can
we-
you please?
So we have a challenge. We have a population, first of all, that is unskilled. The youth population is unemployed. It is unskilled, it is uneducated, it is unemployed. And as a city, you're going to find that it is not very easy for us to make sure that we provide good education for these youths, for those who are able to go in school. You know, our UPE schools, it is a mess. And it is a mess because not that we don't want to do something about it, but because the city is constrained when it comes to finances. So for those ones that are in school, especially the public schools, I cannot tell you that things are good there. Things are not good at all. So when we come to this, the youths that are out of school, who have not managed to go to school, most of them have ended up in drug abuse. Most of them have ended up, some of them they have resorted to violence because they are using drugs. Some of them are being killed day and night because maybe they are stealing. Most of you who go through Naguru, you know some of these hotspots where and it is the youths, and you find that they are 15 years, 16 years, 17 years. These are the people participating in this violence, and they are torturing people who are 30 years and above. So Kampala has a problem of, first of all, youth unemployment and skilled youths. I want to come back to what are we doing as a city to support the youth? First of all, previously, we had the Youth Livelihood Program, which was directly channeled into KCCA, and that was money that was put aside for youths to organize themselves in different groups, to come up with projects, and those projects are financed to make sure that our youth at least get something to do, get some seed capital, and at the end of the day, increase or improve their livelihood. However, research is showing that most of these youths ended up betting the money. Some of them went and started buying smartphones. It is just very few of them that put them in invested the money in ventures that are still even sustained up to now. So it is a very, very big problem that even with all that training, even with all the finances that was given to these youths, it is a problem that the implementation of this youth livelihood program has not been very successful. I cannot say that maybe it is 100%, but if I am to say, if it is implementation percentage of the youth livelihood program, it must be like 20%. So we have our issues as a city, but also the youths also have a problem. So we are also working with different CSOs. We are working with different CBOs. They are supporting us to support our youths, especially when it comes to skilling them. We are training them. We are putting youth-friendly corners in hospitals where they can go and talk to different counselors, because some of them have problems at home. They are being aggressive. They're teenage mothers. They are also having, you find a teenage mother, but also a drug abuser. So we are having all these problems. So when they say that they are not heard, it is true they don't even have information. Our youths, you can find in a group of 10, you'll find one who knows where the division offices are, or who knows where KCCA is, or who even knows their area councillor. So it is a problem. That is why I say that they are also uninformed, and most of them are not willing to learn. So it is very derailing. It is taking, we have also a youth employment bureau as KCCA, where we are training some of the youths. We are giving them computer skills. We are training them to do videography. We are training them to do, we are digitally skilling them to make sure that we improve their livelihood. But it is a very, very small percentage. You have the Kabalagala Youth Support Center, where we are skilling them with the saloon knowledge. We are giving them, we are crafts, making shoes and all those things, but it is a drop in an ocean. We cannot do it alone as a city, because like I can say, currently, all the money that was channeled into the youth livelihood program has been now channeled into the parish development model. Which parish development model? People in Kampala have not yet benefited from it, and things are not clear. Because previously, we were intentional on supporting the youth, but now it is becoming a problem because the money has been put in a pool. So we are still having and also grappling with that problem of the youth. I cannot say that we have done a lot as a city. No. That is not enough, because we have a mandate to administer this city and also with the people that live in there. But like you have mentioned, the challenges ably up there, those challenges are really constraining us. Even the youth themselves are also making it quite difficult. So like we have said, like my colleague from the UN Habitat and from Ministry of Urban Housing, it is important for us to have this discussion around the table. How can we support our youth, the next generation? Because most of us are going, and now look at the kind of generation that we are leaving behind: unskilled, unemployed, uneducated, drug abusers. I mean, what kind of country, what kind of city are we going to have? So we need to have a roundtable discussion. We need to have maybe an interagency discussion for us to heavily and be intentional in supporting the youth. This needs to be a matter of national concern. It needs to go to Parliament, our policymakers in Parliament, to go to the different agencies, for us to be intentional in supporting the youth and making sure that we don't lose this generation, to make sure that we support our grandchildren as we move. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable. Well said. And as you spoke, I was just reflecting, is it a matter of that the youth are unable to make wise decisions, or have they just given up on the systems, that they are unable to hear them out or able to help them out on, and they've resorted to whatever they've resorted to? That is something that we can ponder on. So moving along, we'll hear from our last panelist, who is a grassroots woman, Sarah Nandudu. And my question to you would be, you've dealt with communities for a longer time and you deal with them directly. My question is, how can community needs and interests be integrated into policy and urban development discourses or discussions?
Thank you, Teddy. And I want to say we are so humbled to be part of this panel to discuss on issues around our cities, especially Kampala Capital City Authority. Like you said, my name is Sarah Nandudu, and I'm the National Coordinator of the National Slumless Federation of Uganda, a network of slum saving groups that are linked to each other to form a national federation. So the question you posed to me, to us as a network of the slum dwellers, I want to say we look forward to seeing meaningful partnership and integration of work as regards to planning, implementation, evaluating and making sure that the voices of the communities are very well heard at all stages, especially during the planning level. And this can only be realized if there is space for the communities to be heard, especially at the local level, in terms of promoting their development, and this can easily foster ownership. So I think one of the major issues here is to decentralize policy activities, right from developing the policies to evaluating policies. This should be very, very inclusive and should be decentralized. Decentralized in a form, in a way that wananchi, the community people down there in the slums, should have a platform where they can ably discuss if there is a policy that is to be developed. They should be ably involved at their level, because in most cases you find policies developed, but like the former councillors just said, there is no information that people are aware of what is happening. Only they see is Chiboko giving them canes for failing to implement policies they don't know. So there is need to decentralize some of the things. And once they are decentralized, the voices of the community will be ably heard. And being part of the planning and implementation of such policies, they will ably respond to them and implement them. But also these policies, once they are decentralized, they will foster a community responsiveness, and they will deal it in their local context, because our policies should be localized to people to understand. And a community member, like our councillors just said, especially the youth, who even don't know their councillors and even don't know their divisions, may not be able to understand them. But once localized and brought down to their peer groups, it will be easy for them to adopt, understand, and be able to put their input as well as implement the policy. But also besides that, there should be a way that helps the community to reflect and promote their own priorities through those policies, because communities need to understand what they are doing. And if they do not, following policies will be quite challenging. And this can be disastrous in the community. That's why you see cities like KCCA really are finding it difficult to place people to the right direction, because they have lost it. They cannot know what is going on. No one minds about what is being done in the community. But also apart from that, to avoid negative unintended consequences, like what we are hearing in this meeting, you realize that if people do not have knowledge, we have a slogan which says information is power. If you don't have information, you don't have power to do anything. So the best way to make sure that our voices are listened to in these policies is to ensure that you let people understand, and when they understand, they will be able to avert a lot of consequences that can come in play when people do not understand the policies. But also when we do this, our policymakers, our technocrats, our government it will bring into play accountability and transparency. We have lost interest, we have lost trust, because there's no accountability. And once there is no accountability, then you know that people will not have interest in all you're doing. I don't need to see your mayor's office because I see nothing on the ground. You will hear there is money has come for projects, but nothing tangible on the ground. Therefore, people lose trust, people lose confidence. So there is need to ensure that people are included. And this is the only way that will foster accountability amongst our leaders, our development partners, because that is the only way we can be able to implement as a team. And finally, if we do this, we shall prevent exploitation, because many times we use people for accountability when nothing is on the ground. Like the councillor is saying, many of us are aware PDM money has been sent, but today they will tell you there is no money. And then you will not know who is telling us the truth and who is telling the lie. So there is need to integrate local citizens directly to identify the key priorities for development for their locations, other than doing for them and then complain for them not embracing the programs. Teddy, I think that's what I can say, but above all, decentralize the policy evaluations. Let me, the person who is on the ground, evaluate what my leaders have put, what the technocrats have put. Is it really value for money? Let's work as a team. Let's embrace unity. Let's embrace togetherness to promote development in our settlements via policies. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well said on how to decentralize policies and communities being part and parcel of the development of these policies. And I like what you mentioned, that community responsive policies, it's key. Sometimes these policies, it's hard even to interpret them to a common person. I think Commissioner Pade, you're listening to what Sarah is saying. Again, back to you, Commissioner Pade. I just wanted to ask on forums, there are many working groups like the Sustainable Urban and Housing Working Group, and many other across the city on water, on sanitation, on very other forms. But my question to you is, why do you think such forums or such associations or groups are important in the city or in urban development, and how can they be supported?
Yes, how important are they? You can just get back to Nandudu's submission, and even the submission from the Honorable. These groups are very critical. Of course, we have a number of them. The youth, women, and others are extremely important because, first of all, they are a majority, and they are mainly the consumers of our services as a government. So indeed, they are very, very important. How can they be supported? That is why, like, when you listen to the submission by Nandu, by Sar, how do we involve them? First of all, you can't support them when you do not know them. Begin with, you need to profile them. You need to know which category is where, what are their needs. So there's need for very serious profiling. Sarah knows that together with them and the civil society, act together and others, we have been doing a number of slum upgrading, slum profiling interventions. For instance, when you go to a slum and you're doing slum profiling, I think we just needed to introduce another layer of these profiles, where we are identifying these people specifically. Who are they? What are their needs? How can they be supported? Government has come in with a number of interventions, like you are aware. The Honorable talked about the youth fund, the women funds, all those things are there. Now there's the PDM, among other interventions. But most important of all, these people need to be empowered. The issue of capacity building. The youth can best be utilized, or they can best benefit, especially when they have some form of skills. So skilling the youth, for instance, very critical. Skilling the women is very critical. You cannot support them much unless you have created some value in them through these youth skilling interventions and projects. How do we raise their value? You know, when you talk of the youth, honestly, Uganda is blessed because our population is over 80% young. So we can categorize Uganda among the young nations of this world. But how do we take advantage of this young population? What about the ones who have dropped out of school? How can they be supported? That takes us now to the collective approach through government, through civil society, through the academia. I'm happy these interventions like you are having this one in terms of this research. Can you also come in and help us do real actionable research? Not doing research that ends up in the libraries for academic purposes. Can we have an intervention in the form of research on how best we can support the youth and women? We share such that when we are doing any of our interventions, any of our plans, we put this into consideration. Of course, for instance, when you look at our interventions at the moment as government, when you look at Kampala, you look at all the other cities, our focus at the moment is on things like infrastructure, but I would also want that we give focus on, for instance, employment creation to this youth. We give focus to skilling the youth. Construction of infrastructure, in my view, alone is not enough. It is important, yes, but can we also within that framework, create interventions that empower the youth economically, that empower the women economically. Of course, all of this should be inclusive. What about the disabled people, people living with disabilities, among other vulnerable groups? So the major thing here is inclusion, so that we are talking of universal development for all our people in the urban sector. That to me would give a very good perspective of governance where everyone is involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Paget. One of the key things is that we need to profile these groups. What are they doing? What are they working on? And how can we capitalize on what they're working on and what they're not working on? How can we strengthen the issues that are coming from that? And also, again, as the Honorable talked of, skilling and empowering. But again, I go back to what the Honorable said, that the youth livelihood program has worked, but hasn't worked that much. They were given economically empowered, but they made the wrong decisions. So how do we get out of that? Anyway, as we move on, Fiona, you are the urban development expert, and I have a tough question for you. I don't know if you have an answer to it. And as a development agency that you represent here, do you think that there is a lasting solution that can bring Kampala out of the chaos or the mess that it's in? And if it's there, how can the city be built out of this kind of chaos? If you see any chaos within the city. Thank you.
Teddy, that's a tough question, as you rightly pointed out. I think for Kampala's case is quite complicated. From what the research shows, that there are so many layers upon layers of complexities in terms of the political environment, the governance issues. What is not so unique to Kampala are the challenges that they're facing in terms of urbanization. For instance, we see in many other African cities that access to basic services in these cities is continuously limited, especially in the informal settlements, which is the same case as in Kampala. We see that majority of the populations live in areas that are in wetlands that are fragile, which is also the case in Kampala. So, but from UN Habitat's work, we have had we've had different successes in different situations, and I'll give an example. First, for instance, in Somalia, where we've made significant strides in advancing urban governance through a joint program on local governance and decentralized service delivery. We've seen that such an intervention has yielded substantial impacts. We've seen an increase of about 300% in local revenue generation, mainly by digitalizing the functions and scaling up of automated systems for service, more effective and efficient service delivery. We've also seen, we've had a program called Smart Urban Resilience. It's a joint program which was implemented in 10 cities, where we saw that over 50 million vulnerable people, which has a goal of reaching at least 50 million vulnerable people by 2030. And this program aims at developing an urban resilience system by leveraging on green growth, digital transformation, also addressing the spectrum of shocks and stresses, and prioritizing the needs of vulnerable groups, including women and youth, and also migrants. I think these interventions mainly focus on creating an inclusive environment, not leaving anyone behind. The youth that many of our speakers have been talking about have been, by default, been left behind because, one, they lack the skills that have been mentioned, or they lack the appropriate education that is required. I remember in those days, having a bachelor's degree was enough to get you a very good job, even in government. But today, without a master's degree, with a master's degree, you're as good as someone with a bachelor's degree, because the competition or the level of the jobs available have become much harder to get into. And I think this is where we need to have creative or innovations that allow the youth to be involved through these smart interventions that allow better skilling, not just handcrafts or things that use hand, but where is the technology going? Can we have the youth being the ones driving this technology? So I think we've also had interventions in other areas such as housing, supply of basic sanitation and waste management, tenure security, which is one of our biggest interventions in Uganda. And we've seen that through these small interventions, you have solved some of the issues, but the scale matters. Commissioner said it's good to have action research that tests a small thing to see whether it will work. But I think in our case for Kampala, scale matters. And it's important to target large-scale interventions that can actually create change that is tangible, that is, can be felt by the community. And then also to change the way we do things. The new urban agenda, when it was introduced, it was creating a new way of thinking. It shouldn't be business as usual, I think. It should be, how can we change the way we do things so that these 60 slums that existed I remember this profile was then, I think, around 2011, 2012, they should have reduced by now. Maybe we should be seeing 10 slums by now, not again 60 slums, So the challenge to me and to us all here in the room is to think of ways of changing the narrative, doing some things better, moving away from what we've been doing every day to finding better solutions. And the answer to that, I don't have a definitive response, but I just think that perhaps we can actually change the way we do things and do things better. And this is what we are trying to foster in UN Habitat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know I posed a big question for you, but as your party, at your last remark saying that you cautioned all of us to change the way we think and do things differently. And the other thing that you mentioned that is quite key is that in Kampala, scale matters. In the initiatives, yes, they're doing well, but if we only have micro things, a piecemeal kind of interventions. They don't create an impact. Speaking of interventions, back to you, Honorable, that civil societies initiatives in informal settlements are key. We've seen that through what Fiona has said, through what Sarah has said, that they are key and they're important. Without civil society, I don't think this city or even the country at large we would be where the small steady progress that we have wouldn't be even having it. So my question is, how can this process of the initiatives by civil society, how can they be deepened or enhanced by either the government or also even us as citizens? Thank you.
Yes, I would like to thank my colleagues, Paddy and Fiona. Thank you so much for your discussions. I must say that I'm really picking a lot, and it's important. It's good that we all seem to be on the same page. You people, some of you have never lived in these slum areas. You have not lived in these ghettos. Probably what you can see is what you see on TV, but I've not lived there, but I represent people there. So I am practically like living there. I know how those youth survive. You people, it is terrible. We need to do something about it if we are to save the future generation. I mean, what is taking place in those informal settlements is terrible. It is terrible, and we really need to be intentional in supporting these people. I want to thank the civil society organizations, our partners, because for sure, like you have said, moderator, we would not have done it without them. They are doing a lot. I mean, most of the work for me that I look at, it is civil society organizations, it is CBOs, it is NGOs that we are working with. They are supporting the youth, they are supporting the women, they are supporting people with disabilities, they are there in the business world. They are basically everywhere. But as you know, that sometimes they are constrained. I think all of you who are in Uganda, you know what happened to DGF, and you know how many organizations that DGF was supporting. Many of these organizations ran short of cash. All their activities that they were doing, all of them stalled. People lost employment. All the projects that were in the pipeline, they all stalled. So, and that was more so something that was an activity, or that was a problem that was engineered by our government. And I feel that maybe we should have done more research. I feel that people should have done more research to know the extent to which these civil society organizations were supporting the people in the communities. Because for starters, government is not investing enough to support our people in the informal settlements. So when we come up and suffocate the organizations that are really working, we should be on the same team, because we are scoring in the same goal. But it doesn't make sense when we frustrate and suffocate the civil society organizations. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to provide for the civil society organizations, our partners, the CBOs, an environment that is really friendly, where they can work and be able to express themselves in as long as it is a lawful manner. But suffocating people because maybe they are waking up the population, because they are activating the population, where they are supporting them, because people need to know what is actual on ground, and then at the end of the day, they can be able to appreciate what is going on and probably change. So if we suffocate these organizations because of the work that they are doing, for me, I believe as long as it is moral, I can only say something that is illegal or that is immoral, that is where maybe government can come in. But I think the organizations need to have a friendly environment for starters. We need to put the right legal framework for them in place, and also make sure that we implement it. Sometimes it is quite challenging. Somebody was saying they wanted to register. They were in the community, but they were working informally and they wanted to make their work formal. I think it's an NGO, but at first it was a business. It was a company. They wanted to turn it into an NGO, but I mean, there are a lot of things to do in the forum, and then you have to bribe this one, you have to do this, you have to do this. So sometimes it becomes difficult for them to formalize. Yet when they formalize, they can also help the people on ground, the small businesses on ground to also formalize. And at the end of that day, we shall be earning as a country. So I think it's very important. Then also, I think it is also important for us to support them further by bringing them on board, because most of them, as we are budgeting, as we are doing our strategic plan, they are doing their own and we are also doing their own. So at the end of that day, we are like uncoordinated troops and we are not able to be intentional. Yet, you find that most of these organizations are duplicating work. You find one organization doing the same thing in one area. And at the end of that day, when you look at the results, sometimes they are not that good. Yet, if we say that let these organizations, if we have our inventory, these are the organizations that we have, can this one go here, can this one go there? But we can only achieve that when we have like a roundtable organized discussion with all our organizations that are supporting us in the city, which forum is not normally there, or if it is there, it is not fully supported or fully attended. So at the end of that day, we don't really gather a lot. So us being like a rolling stone will gather no more, because it's not all about accounting, but it is important for us to put meaningful impacts on ground. I am happy about this research, and my request to the Urban Action Lab is to make sure that disseminate these findings as much as you can, because for Kampala, that is our problem. But you have not talked about the issue of funding. The issue of funding is one of the biggest problems that we are having in the city, because for our strategic plan we are having now, we needed about 7 trillion shillings. That is about 1.8 trillion shillings every financial year. But we are receiving less than 500 billion shillings to be able to administer the city, which is very difficult. You people, we are choking. It is not that we don't want to provide services in the city. It is not that we want those potholes in the city. It is not like we don't want drugs in the city health centers. No. We are choking and our budget is very constrained. So I expected, as one of the key challenges, I have not seen financing, but financing should have been actually the major. But I agree with the hodgepodge of leaders. I mean, Kampala is oversubscribed when it comes to leadership. So I really don't want to say a lot, but I think cities, we need to sit. We need to have that forum to support our people in the informal settlements. You people, those people are living life that you cannot even imagine, especially now that it is raining. When it comes, I will now address our colleague from urban housing. You people, it is terrible what is going on there. But I believe with the support of our colleagues, the different organizations, if we sit on the same table, be able to be intentional on some of these challenges in the city, I know at the end of the day, we can achieve something and improve the livelihood of the people in the informal settlements. Thank you so much for listening in.
Okay, thank you so much, Honorable. Coordination is key. We work in silos most of the times, and as you've said, yet we are doing the same work. So how can we capitalize on that? Maybe also the funding can be done in that. Due to time, I will go to the next segment of this webinar, which is the Q&A from the audience. I will read out some of the questions here, but if people you would want to say your comment out, also let me know. Professor Mugaga, you have a comment here. Do you want to say it out or should I read it out? I don't know if he's still here, but anyway, let me just read it because of time. Peter, I think this is just a comment or clarification to Peter's presentation. Peter, your comment on this notation, please. The poor will become poorer in relation to the presidential decree of evicting wetland encroachers, where you see the opposite taking place, especially with continued wetland reclamation for infrastructure development by the rich and well-connected. So he's just commenting on that. Indeed, the poor in the city are becoming poorer and the richer are becoming richer. And then Asimwe Joy, to all government panelists, I hope we still have them around. She would like to know the research needs of your entities, especially in relation to what Sarah suggested on integrating the local population into policy dialogues. I don't know if someone is here, and then let me take a couple of them, and then we'll have them respond. And then I don't know if I pronounce this correctly. Primina is asking how issues of gender and vulnerable people have been addressed in the study. This goes to you, Peter. And then to the panelists who presented on youth. This is honorable. You said you were skilling youth on saloon work and other skills. Was there any study done that suggested that those were the most relevant skills? I think this goes to the livelihood program that you mentioned. And then there is Anonymous is asking, where did the funding come from for these organizations? And then Ronald, the research focuses on African cities. Is there some cross-learning from some of the cities to learn from the innovative approaches from other cities? I think this goes to Peter. So Peter, would you like to come in and give respond to some of the questions?
Thank you very much, Teddy, for raising the questions that are coming in from the attendees. Very interesting questions raised there. At least I've picked out two questions that I could quickly respond to. The first one around the issue of cross-cutting aspects such as gender and youth. Just for clarification, in the research that we did in Kampala, we actually had a domain that specifically focused on youth and capabilities development. And there's a lot that has emerged from that work, which was actually undertaken by one of our colleagues who's also attending this session. That's Professor Susan Mwanga. We hope that we will be able to share the findings from that report as well, and these findings can be accessed by the participants and used accordingly where they feel they respond to certain needs, certain demands regarding addressing issues that affect this particular group. As for gender was considered more as a cross-cutting issue along with climate change. So, yeah, and finance. So these are embedded in the reports from the four different domains, in addition to a little bit of them being elaborated in the political settlements report, as well as the City of Systems report. So essentially, we attempted to engage and speak to those three cross-cutting issues: gender, climate change, municipal finance, by embedding them in the work that we did in the other three domains. Yes, Teddy. So I think I've made a very quick response to that first question, but there was another one which I've kind of it has skipped my mind. I don't know whether you can jog my memory that was raised regarding, I think, the issue of, I think it was more of a comment, the eviction of, residents, poor communities or slum dwellers. I tend not to try to use that word, from the wetlands, which they are apparently encroaching upon, in quotes. It is a very complex issue, which even for us as researchers, we realize that it is not just a matter of providing a certain recommendation that extends services or build proper housing or allocate land to try and address the issue of tenure security, but the root at the heart of the issue of informal settlements in sensitive areas like wetlands for us, I think goes back to engaging with the complex politics around it. Because, for example, what we saw in one settlement that we worked in, that is Katogo Gaba, there were very complex politics that emerged that led to the formation of this particular settlement. And of course, these are politics that are essentially that tie into the politics of clientelism, the politics of patronage. So we have to deal with this particular challenge not in a very simplistic way that it's simply a matter of evicting them or extending services, but deeply engaging with the politics, understanding this politics, and therefore starting to come up with collective solutions, a consensus towards addressing the challenge of encroachment by the urban poor on these sensitive and fragile areas. It is not as straightforward and easy as evict the urban poor, and that is something we have actually tried to avoid in the narrative that we have provided in much of the work that we've been doing, especially when it comes to informal settlement communities. Yes, thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, on those comments.
Teddy?
Hello, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm saying thank you for addressing that. Karim, your hand was up. I don't know if Hannah or Judith can unmute you. And you say your comment or your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Teddy and panelists for this. My name is Karim Buyana from the Urban Action Lab. This is a very good conversation because it moves from governance that is limited to state and government agencies to governance that also includes non-state actors, including civil society and others who are critical urban players. And one of my first comments is that yes, scale matters, but joint working across scales matters more because, as you may realize, there are micro, meso, and macro scales, and the dynamics across those different scales do shape the youth and their capabilities and their well-being. But also realize that Kampala is no longer just a city, it is also a city region in the sense of not only its expanding boundaries, but also what happens in Nairobi or Kigali or Southern Sudan is likely to shape the dynamics in Kampala. So when I talk about the city region, that's what I mean in a much bigger sense. So working across scales jointly matters more. So if there is a reform coalition in Kampala that could work jointly with one in Kigali or Nairobi or Dar es Salaam, that is something that could work for the youth. But also at a micro scale, if there are youth who are not in school and not in formal employment, who could learn something from youth who are in school and in informal employment through local to local dialogue. That is something, that's why.
You keep breaking, Karim. I'm sorry, I have to, what you've said, I think if I got you correctly, is working across scales jointly, and then the youth cross-learning within the youth, the educated and the uneducated, which you're calling local to local working, is key. Any questions, Judith, Hannah, that I should have missed? But Commissioner Pade, if you're still here, there was a question to you on how on what Sarah Nandudu talked about on integrating local population in policy discourse. How is the government tackling that? Have you seen any relevancy in within that, or it's something that you take under advisement?
Yes, what happens right now within a government, policy formulation involves a very, very high range of stakeholder engagement. Before you come up with a policy, these days there's a requirement that there should be evidence of consultation. And in the consultation processes, one is able to integrate a number of issues out there, especially when we engage with the colleagues in the civil society, in the private sector. This is happening. In case there are any gaps, they will certainly be improved. But I can assure you today, you cannot have any policy passed by government without evidence of stakeholder consultation. And in the process, integration is perfectly done. And also a number of our policy frameworks, a number of them are supported by international agencies, and we borrow a lot from international best practices, which so much emphasis on issues of gender, issues of climate change, among other cross-cutting things that must be integrated in our policy framework. This is very critical. I allow me make a few comments as I see it. Someone made a comment on issues of politics. Yes, I agree with you. Our politics has become so dangerous that it is pulling us backwards instead of pulling us forward. And all of this, I can assure you, can be rectified when we have an empowered society, empowered community, and our hope is in the youth. Unfortunately, the youth in most cases are negatively used to even make matters worse, especially for their future. So we need to empower the youth. Youth empowerment, in fact, the future of this country lies in the youth, and each of us should do whatever is within his or her means to ensure that the youth is developed, the youth is empowered, so that they are able to steer the future of this country to the required levels. Peer-to-peer learning, yes, I would really wish to see the youth from Kampala, for instance, interfacing with the youth from Gulu, interfacing with the youth from Fort Portal, so that we are able to first of all create awareness on our youth in Kampala, for instance, that other things are possible outside Kampala and vice versa. I believe when that is done, it will give a very good future for this country in terms of governance of our cities, especially Kampala and other youth and other cities all over the country. I thought I needed to mention that. But most important of all, I would be very unfair if I left without touching on the aspect of metropolitan planning and management. As a governance framework, I did not see this coming out. As you are aware today, you cannot solve Kampala problems unless you address them from where they come from. You can't solve traffic jam in Kampala unless you address issues in Mukono, Wakiso, as far as in PG. So the aspect of metropolitan planning and governance is very, very critical. And as a government, we are moving towards this through bringing together all the entities within the Greater Kampala on the same planning table, and we are soon starting implementation of quite a big World Bank funded project, the Greater Kampala Urban Development Project, that brings all of these people together. And through that, I'm sure we shall improve on the governance processes. We should be able to work with academia. Someone highlighted which areas do you need. In fact, possibly after this, we need to have more engagement so that we engage and see how we can improve on the governance framework, especially of Kampala and the Greater Kampala metropolitan area. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. The audience, we are running short of time, and I want to give 1 minute to Fiona and Sarah on their parting shots. We are unable to answer all your questions. We are sorry for that, but we will plan another webinar and all your questions will be integrated in the next webinar. Fiona and Sarah, 1 minute each as we come to a close. What are your main takeaways from this discussion?
If I may start, thank you, Teddy. From my side, what I would think is integrated development is critical here, like mentioned before. And maybe profiling CSOs that have tried, for the case of Kampala, that have tried to integrate the youth activities in their work. One of its kind is where we've seen the youth transformed actually. And I think it will entrust KCCA to identify such entities, to work with them, to support the transformation of these youth. You will be surprised at which they do. So I want to say, even like the Commissioner Urban said, embracing the forums is critical in this, because in KCCA we have tried to implement municipal and city-wide development forums, but like the Madam Councillor said, there is low interest in this. And these are the spaces that we can engage in different ways. But you realize that KCCA people do not even turn up when even you've organized a meeting. So there is having goodwill for particular activities is critical for us to work as a team. Thank you, Teddy. Though I had a lot to speak for my second question, but I'm sure next time I'll have opportunity to talk more about it. For now, I say thank you.
We're sorry about that, Sarah. Yes, Fiona, your 1 minute, your last shot, please.
Yes. First, thank you for this platform. I think this research was different from the previous studies that we have seen, because it tried to unearth the systemic issues that actually underlie the challenges we see in the slums, also touching upon the political environment that is rarely discussed or even researched. So I would like to commend the ACRC team for having done that. Having said that, I think from today's discussion, my takeaway point is on youth engagement, and then also to appreciate that the different actors have done something. But to retaliate my earlier point on scale, I think perhaps it's time for us to converge our efforts and try to scale up our impact in Kampala for us to be able to see the results of these initiatives. For instance, in the youth, there are so many initiatives that exist, both from the government side, from the private sector, and also from NGOs. But because they are small in nature, they are pilots, we should try as much as we can to move away from pilots. Can it be done? That's a question that is hinged on funding. That is usually a very difficult one to answer. But anyway, thank you so much for this platform. I've learned a lot, and yeah, good day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists for a great discussion. And thank you for the audience for your comments, for your questions, and thank you for your patience and your participation. See you in the next webinar.